You know what really grinds my gears when it comes to comics?
Me?
No.
No.
Uh well, not in comics, just in life.
Oh,
That
see, I
would
see.
be yeah.
Okay.
Um it's it's death.
Makes sense coming from a Jean Grey fan.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good way to start. I have been one of those people, certainly over the last decade, maybe a little bit longer, who is frustrated by the fact that death seems to be totally irrelevant in comics.
Mm.
And specifically when I say comics, when we say comics for the sake of this conversation, we're talking about the big two. We're talking about superhero comics. Um, we've seen countless characters die, over the last decade plus, just to be brought back, sometimes even as early as a few weeks. Um, I think about, my earliest experience with death in comics is Batman dying, quote unquote, in Batman RIP, and Captain America, quote unquote, dying uh in Captain America 25 or whatever number that was, post Civil War. And those felt significant, even though they weren't exactly deaths, but it felt like there was story there. Then, if you go all the way to what, last year, this year, 10 years later or 15 years later, you have Miss Marvel dying in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man and then being resurrected in,
Some
you
X-Men
know,
book.
yeah, some X-Men book like a month or so later. That's my problem with death in comics, is that it feels completely irrelevant most of the time. Feels like a marketing ploy. Do you guys think that it should matter, or do you think that I'm making too much of it and we should accept it as is?
I don't think it should. Okay, so I think about it this two ways. In terms of the big two and it being companies, it's never gonna matter because these are IP at this point, and you can't. They don't want to kill off these ideas if it can be used later on to generate revenue. And I hate that I had to say those words in that order
Mm.
and sound like a suit, but that's just the nature of things. But I think in the text too, um, I wish it would be more spoken about in the text that death doesn't matter, you know, because what bothers me is when they fake that death matters.
Hmm.
Like a character dies, I think it's funny when it's like, oh yeah, they'll be back later. You know, the Krakoan age of comics eliminated the idea of death for mutants, and because of that, that not being a worry for mutants anymore changes people. Like think of what happened to Hank McCoy in Beast. Um, the idea of not having to die and continuing mutant life turned him into a genocidal maniac. um, which I say is more of a character de-evolution, but whatever. So I just wish they would recognize that more, that it doesn't matter, instead of pretending it does. Like it only matters for the every guy. And that's why I think Spider-Man is like an okay character for that to still matter to, because the people that die to Spider-Man that is impactful is like Gwen Stacy, it's Uncle Ben, it's Captain Stacy. They're not superheroes; they're just everyday people. Um, and so far, none of them have been brought back fully. Gwen Stacy a little, um, but that's where I think it matters. I guess it's character dependent, but like it doesn't matter to the X-Men. Should matter to Spider-Man. Yeah.
I, um, I know character deaths mostly through completed stories, so mostly through a book that has an end that I know isn't going to continue. So the death matters insofar as it's no longer a character who participates in the story. So that's always been, or is more common, the experience I have with death in comics is its finality, because you're not going to get this character moving forward because it isn't sequential in that way, and or rather serialized in that way. And I think it should matter because uh, to your point, Tyler, like because Beast could no longer die, it changes the character. If it changes and affects characters, then I think the implementation, or in that scenario, the taking away of death, is effective and matters to the story, to the plot, to the characters, and then in that case to the fans. But when I think you treat it as something as transparent as a marketing ploy like Miss Marvel, it takes out its meaning, or it takes out its value, because it should affect the characters in a way that probably has maybe longer impacts, as opposed to, we're crying in this mosque, and next issue, well, you're back up and at it, and we're just happy again. Like, it needs its time to meditate, and you need time to mourn. And if you don't give it that time, I think you impact the quality of the storytelling, and you impact the value that that person had in their life, because now it's just about their death.
And also, like, without that time to mourn, I mean, one of the most important aspects of death is the people you leave behind. If narratively you don't get to explore that, then what's the point of killing someone?
Right. It's vapid. It's
Yeah.
empty just for the sake of getting to point A, from point A to point B, and that loses meaning.
Yeah, I think about the death of Doctor Strange, that happened a little more recently,
Mm.
and it had no real impact. The story was fine. I guess we got Clea as Doctor Strange for a little while, but Stephen Strange is back, and he's the Doctor again. And I think that timeline was what, maybe less than a year, maybe 9 months or something.
I think it was a year altogether, but due to announcements and solicitations, less than a year.
Yeah, so it's like, was the point of that just to get Clea over? Was it to put Doctor Strange in a weird spot so that when his movie comes out, there's stuff, there's exciting stuff? Was it to get to a new number one? None of the reasons why characters die anymore feels like it's motivated by what makes sense for the story. And that is what is so frustrating to me. It's just like, hey, we need to catch a body in this for it to feel significant. Who are we killing? And that's just not a compelling way to tell story. Juxtapose that with, House and Powers of X, and how, there's an issue where you see the X-Men die. They fail a mission and they die. And it's very, very emotional that they died and the way that they die. But then they're resurrected within the exact same, like, next issue, right? The reason why that works is because Hickman is making a point. He's saying something. He's onto something. So whenever I read that, and I read House of X annually, House and Powers, I know that they're going to come back. I know that they're not really dead, but I still feel it because Hickman made me care. And that's what's lacking.
And I think the one that jumps out to me that's the antithesis of that is using the same characters within the AXE Judgment Day.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Entire swaths of civilians are killed, and it's just like, oh, well, next issue they fixed their way around it. It's like, all right, well, what's the point of all this? What's going on here? There's no narrative tether to or emotional tether to keep me invested.
Well, you lose stakes, and if you lose stakes, the book loses heat. If the book loses heat, well, shit, people don't buy it.
Like, if I see Jean Grey die, she's my favorite character in comics. So if I see her die, sorry?
And see her die again?
Yeah, again and again.
Yeah.
That hurts, right? And it should. It should. We're supposed to be emotionally invested in these characters. But, if I see her die, like some quick, side panel murder, and then she's just back chilling, which is what's been going on in the X books. It's like, I don't care. I don't care. The trick worked once. It worked really well because Hickman got us invested. It even worked in the Crucible with Apocalypse, where he kills in battle another mutant to resurrect them. That had stakes. That felt like it mattered. But AXE Judgment Day was point A, point B.
When you see like Jean Grey die, for example, and you feel bad, is it you feeling bad now? Does it just mean that, oh man, now I don't get to see my character for a while? Like, is it more of like the actual story makes you feel bad?
It's the story. I care. These characters are deeply important to me. So, it's almost like knowing someone in a way. And to see, like, I know Gene will be back or whoever, but it's like, damn, they went through that and I had to read that. It's an emotional experience that I'm having, and that's the success, right? That's the success of a death. A reader views it and they go, oh my God, that's so horrible, or that was so heroic, or whatever. It's supposed to make you feel something. But if you're apathetic to it, which is, I think, where I often land these days, what was the point of doing it?
Especially in Big Two, because then I think
Yeah.
about outside of Big Two, I think of Walking Dead 100,
Oh, well.
which that messed me up, because that was a world where it was established that death is permanent. That it mattered there, and it's just we don't have that in the Big Two, so I don't feel like it matters.
And I think by making those comparisons, you also get to see that there's something being lost from from that narrative perspective. Like my mind went to Saga, and one of the big major, like a number of characters there have these deaths, and that plays out into the rest of the story, or how somebody reacts to situations, or how it even affects the direction of the book and its protagonists. um like if you're not putting in the effort to build and craft that, um yeah, you're losing me as an engaged reader as well.
And Saga is a smart book with it too, because it knows it's a comic where it'll bring characters back, and you're like,
Mhm.
wait, are they back? No, it's a hallucination. Oh, it was in their mind.
Sure, yeah.
So it's playing with your pre-established ideas of resurrection in comics, and then like turning it again. For
And
me, like the real death in comics for me at this point with Big Two is like, all right, well, they're not going to be making a movie about this, so the character is not going to be in the comics. It's more all the stuff that matters to me is not even the content of the comic anymore. It's more the external publishing issues that happen. Like when Fantastic Four wasn't a comic for a while, because Marvel didn't have the movie rights to it at the time, and that was more of a death than the actual deaths.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I mean, I just think that, death as a thing is something that human beings struggle to deal with. So it shouldn't be trivialized in a place where we're coming to I mean, to experience emotions that aren't necessarily related to our lives. There can be a catharsis or a helping you through the grieving process when you see something like that happen, right? When it's like, oh my God, Jean Grey died, you have to go through that process. I think that when you trivialize that, you're taking away the meaning. And why would you want to take away meaning? Every creator on earth should be looking for all the meaning. You know what I'm saying? Like, you should try to get strip mine your stories for every bit of meaning you can get. Why would you ruin that? Why would you shoot yourself in the foot like that? I don't
i-
understand it.
is there any death at the moment that hasn't been, um I don't know, I guess reversed and or taken back, like something happens to explain and remove that worth?
The only one I can think of is Uncle Ben, but then you even have like multiversal stuff where even though our main Uncle Ben is dead, a different Uncle Ben will show up and teach Peter a lesson. So even then, it's not fully permanent. Um,
But do you consider those the same thing?
what like a multiversal thing as being a way of reviving
Of
someone?
like does that count as a resurrection for a character in that example, I guess?
Not permanently, but I think thematically it can.
Mm.
It depends on who it is.
Yeah.
It really does. I think that there is value, right, to Spider-Man if there is a multiversal Uncle Ben who Peter can speak with and have a big emotional moment with. But you can't have that same multiversal Uncle Ben be a recurring character because that undercuts the value of his absence. Right? There's a value in the absence of Uncle Ben that you lose when you bring him back. A great example that I can think of, where it was actually done well, is Nightcrawler died in Messiah Complex. And then there was a Nightcrawler from the AOA, the Age of Apocalypse universe, that ends up coming to 616. And Wolverine and all these other characters are like, you're back. We missed you so much. And in real time, it had been years. I think 2008 was when he died. And he came back in like 2013 or something like that. So it had been years. But all these characters are reacting to Nightcrawler as if it's the same one, and it's not. And he doesn't feel about them the way they feel about him. So that created narrative tension and drama. And they used, it's not a resurrection, but they used a multiversal version to get that. It's the same thing that James Gunn did in Guardians of the Galaxy 3 with Gamora. It's the same concept. Gamora was really dead, but here's this other one that doesn't feel the way about them that they do.
Right. And that was clever because you lose, or you maintain the reaction from the individuals to that Gamora and the ties. But you get to establish new relationships on top of that. Like, it doesn't remove one; it adds, if anything.
And I don't want it to seem like I'm saying death should be permanent in comics. I don't think that. I think you can't do that. It wouldn't make sense to do it, and I don't want it. I don't want to lose anyone permanently. But all I'm saying is that there are, and this comes down to craft. This is a talent issue for the most part. There are ways to make these deaths feel like they count, feel important, not feel cheap. I think all those things are achievable. And when we've seen them handled by the top tier creators who seem to have a story, it works.
Like even the Miss Marvel thing. Like I think the death didn't matter, but some of those stories that were in that anniversary issue that like G. Willow Wilson did, were impactful for the story in and of itself.
Yes. And the only negative thing I have to say to that is just the way it was undercut by, solicits, by time. They just didn't give it enough time.
By common sense. Yeah.
A bit of thought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And maybe that's a less egregious one because, they did want to get her to be a mutant and yada, yada, yada. But, this is a hot button issue. So I'm so curious to hear what you guys that are listening to us think about this. Do you care if death matters? Is mattering only relevant to the story that it happened in and screw everything else? I think there are a lot of perspectives on death in comics. And so we'd love to hear from you what you think about it. You guys know how to get in contact with us. Leave us a comment. All the YouTube stuff. Subscribe, like the video. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.